think you could possibly, by accident, arrange to leave me behind here on this planet? That would be punishment enough.
I can't do that, Harry. But I will appear as a character witness at your trial. If you think that'll help.
They'll throw away the key.
Hey everyone, all aboard for Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mance.
And I'm Steve Morris.
And every week on Enterprise Incidents, we do a deep dive into a brand new original series episode. And we are so excited because we love Star Trek. Star Trek has been a part of our lives since we were little itty bitty little kids, and we have grown up with Star Trek, and we have had new perspectives on Star Trek episodes as we've gotten older. Episodes we used to like, we really love, and episodes that we really love, maybe they don't hold up so much. So here we are, two grown men, lifelong Star Trek fans, doing deep dives into each and every episode of Star Trek, the original series. That brings us to the current episode, because we are going in production order, ladies and gentlemen, not air date order. Production order is a whole lot more fun because we get to see the actual evolution of Star Trek as it happened. This week's episode is Mudd's Women. Wow, wow.
It's so funny because both you and I think we talked about that. We love all of Star Trek, and even the episodes that are lesser than, they still have some soft spot in our hearts. But I gotta say, those first three episodes are so interesting and fascinating and just so exciting. And when particularly when Shatner comes on, and it just is really working. And now you get to this episode, and it's like, okay, you know.
You know what, Steve? That's actually a great way to put it. And by the way, when you talk about how we've done the first three episodes, like I said, we are going in production order. So the first episode that we recorded for Enterprise Incidents was The Cage. Usually people start off with Where No Man Has Gone Before, but we started with Captain Christopher Pike on The Cage. So if you haven't heard our Enterprise Incidents podcast on The Cage, you got to go back and catch up. But that brings us, here we are, Mudd's Women. And Steve, the sort of feel of this episode is such that I will take an okay Star Trek episode over good episodes of so many other TV shows, because even just an okay episode of Star Trek is still full of so many merits, and Mudd's Women does have a lot of merits. And I have to say that watching it again just recently to prep for this podcast, look, let's be honest, Mudd's Women is not an episode that I watch over and over again, sometimes on a weekly basis, like some of these other episodes that we're going to talk about. So watching Mudd's Women from start to finish again for the first time in a really long time, I found a whole lot more to like about it. But I still think it's like you said, okay.
Well, what's so funny about it is that when I was a kid, whatever episode of Star Trek was on, I watched, so I watched them all over and over again and fairly equally. There was never a moment as a kid where a Star Trek episode was coming on and I saw what episode it was and I said, nah, I'm not going to watch it. That literally never happened. But as a grown-up, when we have streaming services and on-demand things, well, then I would look at lists of Star Trek episodes and pick one. I don't think I picked Mudd's Women in a long, long time. So I hadn't seen it in a while. And there are definitely some interesting things to talk about. Absolutely.
Well, also, when you're looking at the production order of Star Trek and you look at Mudd's Women, like after Star Trek was sold to series, it was only the second proper series episode filmed after the Corbomite Maneuver. And the Corbomite Maneuver, as we discussed on episode 3 of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve, did such a terrific job of laying the foundation for Star Trek. The Corbomite Maneuver is Star Trek's mission statement. And while the very detailed and thorough special effects kept that episode from being the first proper series episode to air, by the time it did air, it was a great episode. Now, Mudd's Women was the second episode to be filmed as part of the proper series. It was filmed between June 2nd and June 13th, 1966. It actually aired on October 13th, 1966, making it the 6th episode to air. The cost of this episode was $198,534, which is a little over $5,000 over the budget. Star Trek's first season per episode budget was $193,500. So this episode actually went $5,000 over budget, whereas the Corbomite maneuver was $3,000 under budget. So whatever surplus they had from the Corbomite maneuver was already gone.
That's so crazy, because I go like, where'd the money go on this one? It's not like there's a lot of scale to it, you know?
Well, if you ask me, I think the money went to the beginning, the teaser, where you see the sort of the asteroid field, which I have to say looks a whole lot better in the remastered version with the better visual effects. But this episode was written by Stephen Kandel, and it was extensively rewritten by Gene Roddenberry. He came up with the original story concept. Now, here's the thing. Now, Steve, we talked about how Mudd's Women was one of the 3 scripts that were considered to be the second pilot for Star Trek. And thank goodness, they went with Where No Man Has Gone Before, which you and I both agree isn't just a great pilot. It's one of the very best Star Trek episodes ever made. But in actuality, Mudd's Women was used in Gene Roddenberry's actual series proposal that he wrote on March 11th, 1964, where it was called, quite simply, The Women. And the short and sweet description of this episode was, and I quote, "Duplicating a page from the Old West, hanky-panky aboard with a cargo of women destined for a far-off colony." That was all Roddenberry had, but that was enough for him to commission Stephen Kandel to write the screenplay and do a couple of passes before he fine-tuned it. And the episode was directed by Harvey Hart. It was the only episode that he directed because the episode went 1 day over schedule, and it was a hard episode to cut and edit because of the very artistic and challenging camera angles that Harvey Hart used while filming this episode. And you can see it in the episode, some of the camera angles that Harvey Hart used. And it was not, a lot of these angles were not used again in later episodes. One thing I do love about this episode is the score composed by Fred Steiner. That score was recorded on September 7th, 1966.
You so much in here that I wanted to comment on. So the first thing is, it was so funny, that description that he said, like taking a page from the Old West, because that's what I've always thought. This is a Western, and Gene Roddenberry wrote Westerns, and this is totally bringing out the mail order brides to the guy who's in the gold rush. I mean, that's literally what the story is. And I've always thought that. And so it's funny that actually is in the description. In terms of the camera work, I really noticed it this time, partially because I was watching for this show, but it's really weird the way it was shot. And as an editor, I can see why it was really hard to cut, because it's breaking all sorts of rules and all the moves and rack focuses and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, that looks like it would be hard to cut.
Well, for a weekly series that was as challenging and production heavy and difficult to produce as Star Trek was, they were happy with the work that Harvey Hart did, but because he did go over schedule and because he presented some editing challenges, he was not invited back to film another episode. Now, when you were talking about, Steve, about the Old West, like, one thing I do like about this episode is, for one thing, and I love this about so many episodes of Star Trek, is that you really get the sense that the Enterprise is really way the hell out there, and that these miners on Rigel 12, and we'll get to this, are really living on the fringes of the galaxy, of the explored part of the galaxy, which really does make this episode feel like a Western, and feel like it's the Old West, and feel like space truly is the final frontier, because these people are living on the outskirts of basically everything.
Yeah, no, I totally, absolutely agree. It does definitely give that impression.
But before we get into our sort of like breakdown, overall, what is it about Mudd's Women that kept you from loving it, that made you just go, it's okay?
Well, I would say, let me say two things about it. The first thing is what I think it demonstrates, which is why I understand the idea of having to be the pilot, is that it demonstrates the flexibility of Star Trek. That's what I like. That's the idea that I like, because one of the great things about Star Trek is we could do heavy dramatic things. We could do exciting action things, and we could do some kind of silly fun things. And this is trying to be in the sort of telling a totally different kind of story. What I think makes it kind of average is that I don't think they handle the stakes well. I think that the situation is kind of blown up. There's a very serious situation going on, and we're not really dealing with it. And we're dealing with this, relationships that don't quite make sense. Eve's feelings about the captain don't quite make sense. The miner's behavior doesn't quite make sense. Harry Mudd is acting in a completely different movie. I mean, he's all over and it's funny. Mudd seems to be a very divisive character in Star Trek. There are some people that hate him. I like him, actually. And I actually like Mudd as a completely different kind of episode. But yeah, I think this doesn't all hold together right. That's my feeling.
When you look at the first season of Star Trek, the episode that often gets credit for being the first sort of lighthearted comedic episode is Tomorrow Was Yesterday, where they pick up the Air Force pilot, they go back in time. But this is actually the first episode to do it because of basically Roger C. Carmel's scene-stealing or scene-chilling performance as Harry Mudd. And I think you're right. I like Mudd a lot. The second season episode. I think of all the characters to revisit throughout the 3 seasons of Star Trek. I mean, it was nice to see some rare continuity where they brought back a character. And I think by the time Mudd aired in the middle of the second season, this is when Gene Kuhn is doing the day-to-day producing of the show. Look, like we said before, Star Trek second season is just the greatest season of Star Trek ever produced over 55 years. But my point is that they really figured out what Star Trek was by then. It was a well-oiled machine. They knew what they were doing. But with Mudd's Women, second episode as a proper series to be filmed, they were still figuring themselves out, particularly Leonard Nimoy, in trying to figure out what was working for him as Spock and what was not working. But one thing that I really do love about this episode, in addition to the score, Fred Steiner's score, is Jerry Finnerman's cinematography, the lighting, the use of the colors, and the use of the shadows, the use of the soft focus for Mudd's Women. There's a lot to admire about the look of this episode. And I don't mean the look of the actual women, but I mean the look of the cinematography and the production design.
It's funny because I kind of disagree on that but partially because this is not the direction Star Trek ends up going. So it looks very not Star Trek to me. And this is where you get into me as a person who, went to film school and teaches directing, that like, I go, oh, that soft focus is too much. Even as a kid, I think I thought it was a little bit too much. It feels to me like a director trying to show off, as opposed to what you see in like Corbin Knight or Balance of Terror or things like that, where there are some interesting camera moves, but they're held back a little bit more, I would say.
First of all, I think you're right. I think in terms of not looking like Star Trek, I mean, I admire the way that the episode looks. And obviously, as the series went on, even Jerry Finnerman figured out what to do, what was working, what wasn't working. I think this episode does have an interesting look to it. But, the soft focus, like when you get to other episodes, especially love stories, I like the soft focus. I always like the way they shot, like, Yeoman Rand and, obviously Edith Keeler and City on the Edge of Forever. I think that just goes with the territory. When you're watching Star Trek, there's a love interest, and bring on the soft focus, baby.
Sure.
But while you think it doesn't look like Star Trek, I think the episode doesn't feel like Star Trek because of just the way it marginalizes women. It's sexist. It's dated. It's the episode with the space hookers. This doesn't really represent Star Trek at its finest, but at the same time, the episode does come with a message. And
it does.
That is very much in tune with what Star Trek was all about. So this episode, I think, just is an exercise in paradoxes, in the sense that they were still not quite there, and it would still take a few episodes for them to get there, for them to really just like get it down and hit their stride and really get the right feel for what Star Trek is.
I wish, Scott, I could put you in soft focus right now, and it might make our conversation a little bit more romantic.
Yeah, Zoom doesn't really do the trick, does it? But, listen, this is still a landmark episode because it was an early episode. And while this episode was airing in October, some interesting history happened around the airing of this episode.
Oh, yeah.
It aired on October 13th, 1966. So on October 9th, my friend, the Baltimore Orioles beat the LA Dodgers in Game 4 to win the World Series.
Wow.
On October 10th, the Beach Boys released their most famous, their most successful, and their most influential single of all time. That song is Good, Good, Good Vibrations. On October 14th, after his return from South Vietnam, U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara sent a memo to President Johnson saying the U.S. effort there was failing. And I quote, "I see no reasonable way to bring the war to an end soon." And then on October 16th, Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton created the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California.
Oh, it's so amazing putting this in context of some of the turmoil that's going on in the country, right here in the middle of the 60s. I mean, it's just thinking that you would change the channel on the news from watching Vietnam or hearing about the Black Panthers, and then you'd put on Mudd's Women.
That is one of the reasons why Star Trek stood out, why it was and is 55 years later still great, why Star Trek, maybe not Mudd's Women didn't do this, but why Star Trek as a whole inspired people to become scientists, become astronauts, become doctors. Because, Steve, at that time, just like you said, between Vietnam and civil rights, the counterculture, the Cold War, here was a show that was positive. And I think that for people who say, and I don't want to knock, the later Star Trek shows, but I'm not a fan of dark Trek. I want my Star Trek to be aspirational and inspiring and full of hope and give us something to look forward to. And I think that that's one of the many reasons why the original series still stands as the best Star Trek series of them all. Yes, I said it.
That's why we're here.
Captain's log, stardate 1329.8. The USS Enterprise in pursuit of an unidentified vessel.
There are some Star Trek teasers that you just go, holy Toledo, wow, that was a great teaser. Like the teaser for like Mirror Mirror, or the teaser for the Doomsday Machine. Where you just go, holy Toledo, you put all that in just a 3 to 4 minute teaser. The teaser for Mudd's Women is very like, okay, it catches your interest a little, like what is the ship they're chasing? And they go into an asteroid field. But again, one thing I notice here in the teaser is Fred Steiner's score, is the cinematography, the camera angles. And especially what I like about it is that the dynamic on the bridge, everyone knows their place. Everyone's contributing. This is really the dynamic between Kirk and Spock and Kirk and Scotty and Sulu and Kirk, and even Lieutenant Farrell, the navigator, and Kirk. You see them all working, and Kirk, I think in the earlier episodes, certainly more than the later ones where Shatner would sort of like lay it on a little thick with the acting. The earlier episodes, Kirk is cool as a cucumber. He does not break a sweat at all. And I think that just when you watch, like when you look at Corbomite maneuver, when the cube starts spinning and it's about to explode, it isn't until Bailey freezes that Kirk yells at him, "Lock phasers." But in this, when they're chasing the ship into the asteroid field, they keep their cool. They're just it's a well-oiled machine on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Well, but this also is, I said that I feel like the stakes in this show just don't quite match up. We just came off Corbomite maneuver where the ship felt really powerful. And the thing we were up against was super powerful. There's really, really high stakes. And yet the Enterprise basically almost gets killed in the very teaser doing something that seems so nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wait, that you wiped out the dilithium crystals and that this is going to be the end of the ship? You know, like the last episode, we dealt with crazy stuff. And I think that's kind of how I feel throughout is that, I mean, what's happening is really big. We are all going to die. And yet nobody's really acting like this is a big deal. It's a very strange kind of miscue, you know, between them for me.
So they've decided to sort of extend their shields to cover this other mysterious spaceship that's veered into an asteroid field. And it's definitely not equipped to be in an asteroid field that taxes their lithium crystals, not dilithium, because this is only the second time after Where No Man Has Gone Before that the crystals are referred to as lithium crystals. After this point on, it'll be dilithium crystals. But when the crystal circuits short out, the sound effect that they used, you know, just didn't feel like a very foreboding sound effect that like we've lost our lithium crystal circuit. It just sounded like a little, you know, stuck your finger too close to an electrical socket. But it does sort of put the Enterprise at its limit, where they're in sort of a similar situation in Where No Man Has Gone Before, where Earth bases that were just days away are now months or years at a distance. But this is the point when they have to beam this crew aboard, and that's when we see our first appearance, beaming aboard the transporter platform of, well, he's not Harry Mudd yet. He's Captain Leo Walsh.
Yeah. I love his performance. I think it's really fun. I think it shows kind of the flexibility of Star Trek for me. It's funny, but watching, you know, old TV from the 60s, this guy would pop up here and there in various parts. And he's always a very fun actor. And I think one of the interesting things that it does show is some of the comedic skills of Shatner later on. Like you see some of those moves that he has because he's playing off of this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good point, Steve. You know, because when you get to an episode like Tomorrow's Yesterday, and you get a much better sense of Shatner's comic timing, which was just brilliant. Yeah. I mean, you know, we'd see much, much later in his career. He was like, wait a minute. And we're like, no. Did you not see the Trouble with Tribbles, a piece of the action? Shatner is funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you, I was like, when I was growing up and I was watching TV on UHF, remember UHF? And I remember there was a show called the Mothers-in-Law. And that was where I first got a sort of a glimpse into Roger C. Carmel. And that was around the same time that I was starting to watch Star Trek anyway. And by the time I got to Mudd's Women, because I had started watching it was already in the second season. So when it started over, and I was like, oh, that's the guy from Mothers-in-Law. But right. I think that just overall, Roger C. Carmel's performance makes the episode better than it probably is. And he's what this episode needed to make it decent enough to the point where it's not the alternative factor. It's not And the Children Shall Lead. It's watchable, even if it's not a favorite that I binge on, like we just talked about.
So let's beam his crew aboard. I'm ready to meet them. They sound interesting.
Well, before the crew actually beams aboard, an asteroid strikes this spaceship and it explodes. But fortunately, the crew was caught in the transporter beam and was safely beamed aboard. Every bit of hair and makeup and their dress in place.
What I like is that Leo says, I think my crew is in place now. And what he means is that they're all striking perfect poses. So when they arrive on the Enterprise, they look like fashion models.
And these three women, you have Eve, played by Karen Steele, Ruth, played by Maggie Threat, and Magda, played by Susan Denberg, who was also Miss August 1966 in that year's issue of Playboy. So, yeah, there you go. No wonder this crew was so happy. But that is when we see the effect immediately on the male crew members of the Enterprise, as Scotty and McCoy can't keep their eyes in their sockets, and Spock is looking at both of them like, what's your problem?
And they play it really well. I think DeForest Kelley and James Doohan play this. They knew what was required for this scene, and they play it very, very well. And it's fun in the way that, I mean, and this, so we should say, I think, that I believe in judging art both for its time and for our time. So this whole episode deals with gender roles and male-female relationships in a very old, 1960s way. And so are they objectifying these women throughout this whole show? Oh, yeah. Are they, that is what the show is about. And so, like, there are some feelings I have about some of the stuff that gets said and done in this episode, but it's the mid-60s. I mean, I think what you said before it's a really good point. What's the most problematic thing about it, it's not really Star Trek. Right. It's not reflecting Star Trek values.
But that's a good point.
But the bits of, McCoy not being able to respond quite right, or not responding to the captain on the bridge, and all that stuff is funny. It's funny stuff.
That fella sounded a mite upset, indeed. Yes. Yes, they are.
Leonard Nimoy's, his sort of take on Spock at this point is to, you see him curious and amused by the reactions that McCoy and Scotty are giving. And, this episode is one where Spock is kind of a wise ass. And because that was the sort of take that Nimoy had on Spock at that moment, he does play it well. It's almost like he can't wait to see what his captain is going to think when he sees what this cargo is really all about. And Spock takes them over and goes into the turbolift. Spock is referred to as part Vulcanian.
You're part Vulcanian, aren't you?
Not Vulcan, but Vulcanian. It wasn't until later in the first season that he was just called, a Vulcan. And then I love when Spock, goes into Kirk's quarters. He goes,
"The commander of the transport to see you, Captain."
He's like taking a lot of joy in this. And then, of course, Kirk looks up and sees Mudd's women, and then we have the same reaction as Scotty and McCoy.
Well, and everywhere the women walk, that's where we get this score that you were talking about, which is very much like, Hey Big Spender, it's that kind of evocative of a certain kind of sexuality music. And you're also seeing, like, part of what's happening with the camera work is I think they're using longer lenses than they would normally use in Star Trek. And longer lenses bring the image much closer, and it also narrows the depth of field. And what that means is, how much stuff can I have in the frame that's in focus? So if you have someone standing behind someone else and you're on a wide lens, they'll both be in focus. The best example of big depth of field is Citizen Kane. But if you have the long lens, then it throws only a small part of the frame will be in focus. Everything else goes out of focus. And so he's using all these longer lenses, lots of people out of focus. And he also likes being in close-ups more than in wider masters and two shots, which we see much more often in the rest of Star Trek. So that's part of what's looking different in this.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why Steve Morris teaches courses on directing. And I just listen. I listen when he says all that. So the women walk in, and Kirk looks up and he sees the women.
And the ladies? Is this your crew, Captain?
Well, no, Captain. This is me cargo.
And then the surprised look on Shatner's face is, a great subtle reaction shot that's perfect for this episode. And that brings us to the end of the first act.
What I think they do well is that Shatner clearly has a little bit more control over over the effect the women are having on him than McCoy or Sulu or Scotty or any of those people. Not as much as Spock does, of course. The other thing I think we should point out is, I think this is the first time that we see what I will call Gene Roddenberry's penchant for very scantily clad women. Like the ridiculousness of some of the costumes that he put women in, or that Star Trek put women in the course of the show, they get a lot sillier as we go along. But this is the first, like the what is it? Is it Magda is the blonde?
Yes, that's right.
Like her outfit,
the short hair.
Yeah, a super, super short skirt, a lot of skin showing. And this is the weird, again, this is like, yes, it is a progressive show that's about humanism and about, gender equality. And it's also a show about nerds who like pretty girls,
Yeah. Well, listen, one thing that we haven't yet talked about through our first 3 episodes is the costume design, in the sense that, listen, I love how retro the costumes look now. And of course, the women on the Enterprise, for the first 2 episodes, the women wore long pants and long sleeve shirts like the men. But by the time you got to the proper series, the women were in those really short mini skirts. So that was one thing that made it a little more misogynistic. But also, the costume designer, William Ware Theiss, Bill Theiss, he was a genius, actually, when it came to designing costumes for alien races and for, like the dress uniforms that the Enterprise crew wore. I love his costume design. But yes, under Roddenberry's direction, he did want the skirts to be a little on the shorter side. And, that was 1966, friends.
Yep.
Well, how the devil am I supposed to know this is a starship, Captain?
Harry Mudd, or Leo Walsh, I'm just going to call him Harry Mudd. He is just a little too confident. He tosses his hat onto Kirk's lap, and the look that Kirk gives him. And by the time Kirk is called back to the bridge, and the severity of the situation with losing their lithium crystal circuits, and now they're on battery power, is brought to Kirk's attention. And you can see how frustrated Scotty is.
That jackass Walsh not only wrecked his own vessel, but in saving his skin.
It makes you feel any better, engineer. That's one jackass we're going to see skinned.
I like stuff like that. And again, that's another scene where if you look at the camera angle of that scene, it's not something that they used very often.
State your name for the record.
Leo Francis Walsh.
Incorrect.
That whole thing felt very, very contrived. And
I think they used it as an opportunity for a comedic bit. You know what I mean? And I think there are 2 things. One is, they're still trying to figure out, well, what exactly does this ship, the Enterprise, do? And in this episode, they feel more like space cops than they do that we're law enforcement. In fact, there's that thing I think that was cut out of Where No Man Has Gone Before, where he says, after practicing, space law enforcement for a while. And it feels a little bit like that. And then you get the funny bit of the lie detector machine, the computer continually going incorrect.
State your correct name for the record.
Harry Mudd.
Incorrect.
Harcourt Fenton Mudd.
Which is a really good name, by the way.
Yeah, Harcourt. Getting ahead of ourselves here, but
and it's a funny bit.
Yeah, it's funny enough, and actually it's Roger Carmel who holds that scene together. But the whole idea for them now is to make it to Rigel 12, where there is a lithium colony, so they can get the crystals they need to repower the Enterprise.
And the other thing we get too in this trial scene is at the very end we find out what the plot is. That these are women that Harry Mudd has made a deal to go have them be wives somewhere for rich men, one thing about this, by the way, everyone always refers to this as this is the space prostitutes episode, space hookers. I don't think these are not prostitutes. They're not hookers. Like prostitutes sell sex and then go and sell sex somewhere else. These are mail order wives, and this is a thing that happened in the Old West. When the prospectors and stuff went out for the gold rush, there were far more men than there were women, and they would try to entice women from back east to brave this huge journey to get to the West. And this is something that's gone on, in fact, still goes on today. There are places where women that are in poorer countries that don't really see a way out, they get a bunch of money to go marry someone somewhere else. And here's the thing that I was thinking about, because I was searching for deeper themes to talk about within this episode than maybe there are. But one thing that I find really interesting is we all believe that the way that relationships work is people fall in love and then they decide to get married and they get married. That idea of romantic love and getting married for that's a pretty recent invention. It's only in the last couple of 100 years that we started thinking that is the norm. And there are lots of countries where it's still not the norm. If you grew up, and I had a lot of students who were from India, and their families all came from arranged marriages.
Wow.
That's in fact the norm. So the idea, I personally don't have that much of a problem with this idea of someone making this choice. I think people are in charge of their own thing. And if that's what they want to do to get a better life, I'm kind of okay with it. And it certainly seems like Eve desperately and passionately wanted to get out of the situation that she was in.
Fine, Evie, fine.
No, it's not fine. We've got men willing to be our husbands waiting for us, and you're taking us in the opposite direction.
Yeah. They make Eve the more empathetic of the three women.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's really important. That's very, very important that you pointed out that they are not, in fact, space hookers, but they are mail order wives, so to speak. It's like a print the legend comment,
Right.
It's been talked about for so long that it's the space hookers episode. And actually it is not about space hookers, but we also see that up to this point in the relationship between Kirk and Harry, Kirk is the one that had the upper hand because he's the captain of the Enterprise. But at this point, we see the episode flip because Harry Mudd comes up with the idea to hold the Enterprise hostage in exchange for his freedom. And that's when he kicks his feet up onto the briefing room table and says, the next orders you're going to be taking come from Harcourt Fenton Mudd. It's a great way to end the second, basically the midpoint of the episode.
It's a good bit. And then so here's the other thing I had to look up because I was thinking about it, is that his name always makes me think of my name is Mudd, that expression, his name is Mudd. And I'm sure that's why they picked it. And do you know where that expression comes from?
You're going to tell me.
I am going to tell you. And it's a very interesting one. It comes from Dr. Samuel Mudd, who is the doctor that treated John Wilkes Booth's broken leg after he assassinated Abraham Lincoln. And so he was arrested as part of the conspiracy. There's no evidence that he actually knew that a guy walked in with a broken leg, and whether or not he was part of the conspiracy, probably he wasn't. And so my name is Mudd this is the guy that helped the guy that killed Abraham Lincoln. That is where that comes from.
Wow. Oh my gosh. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, not only does Steve Morris teach directing, he teaches U.S. history. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's amazing. That's so fascinating.
There's actually a movie about him, and I'm trying to remember who was in it because he was in prison forever after that. And then and I don't remember all the details anymore, but he ended up being this just saint of a doctor in this prison, working for years and years, and saved a lot of people's lives.
Well, here we go with Act 3. Now we're in Sickbay, and Ruth walks into the room and catches McCoy's attention, distracts him completely. And then while she's trying to seduce him to kind of get the information that she wants from him, she walks by his medical scanner, and it starts to make a funny sound and a funny noise. And McCoy, I love that DeForest Kelley's reaction to this. He kind of snaps out of it for a second, like, wait a minute.
Would you walk past my panel again, please?
He's so funny. I'm so glad these guys, I know all of them felt trapped by these roles to some degree, but there's a really good group of actors. And he really knew how to play this kind of, I love it's not supposed to do that. I love that little bit. It's funny.
These actors, we're on episode 4, but I can't wait for episode 5, which is an episode that we really get to see these actors bring their A game in one of the absolute seminal episodes in the development of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy relationship. I'm talking about The Enemy Within, but we're not there yet. We're still on Mudd's Women. And like you mentioned with Eve, she really wants out of this situation. And she is in Kirk's quarters trying to seduce Kirk. And Kirk is behaving himself, flirting to an extent, but keeping his distance, even though she has her arms around him. And then she breaks down and just says, the gig is up. I can't do this. I'm so sorry. You seem like a super guy, but I can't do this. And she runs out of the room. And Kirk is like, what the hell just happened?
And this is where I just feel like the script isn't quite tight, because it's so funny that because I read a lot of student scripts and things like that, and most of them are terrible, and trying to diagnose like what exactly is the problem here. And I think the Eve Kirk thing is one of the things that is problematic, because I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to do that there is actually a genuine attraction, not just from Eve to Kirk, but from Kirk to Eve. And they're trying to do that Harry Mudd has put her up to seduce Kirk, and she doesn't want to do that because she actually likes the guy and she's actually an honest person. I totally understand that's what they're trying to do, but it doesn't quite work. Like, we never see an actual moment of real connection between the two of them. If you had the actual moment of real connection and then she played on it in order to seduce him and then backed off, then that would kind of work. But it's more falls into this, like, they keep kind of telling us that there's something going on here, but there really isn't.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's although I do think that William Shatner and Karen Steele had very good chemistry. I just feel like this was another part of the story that feels forced and contrived.
Yeah.
But one thing that the episode does sort of set up is that something is starting to be a little off with Mudd's women. The scene where, Mudd uses the communicator that Magda stole to call Rigel 12, which, the fact that he was able to reach out to Rigel 12 through a little communicator and no one on the bridge got wind that Harry Mudd was doing this. Another contrivance in the episode, but I don't want to be too hard on it.
Well, and again, it's like, I understand what they were trying to do, like the idea that the women were each had to go on a mission and use their feminine wiles to do a thing. That's what they're trying to do, but we don't really get to see that actually happen.
Yeah. Good point. But when we find Kirk on the bridge talking to McCoy, they're trying to figure out what is it about Mudd's women? Like, why are they having such an effect on us? Do they really look different from other women that we've seen? Are we tired and they're beautiful, and they are so beautiful?
Are they, Jim? Are they actually more lovely, pound for pound, measurement for measurement, than any other women you've known?
I mean, like, look around you. Look on the rest of the starship. We've got beautiful women all over the place. But when the Enterprise finally reaches Rigel 12, and we go back to Mudd's women, and we see them finally, for the first time, for who they really are, it's a really good scene. It's creepy.
Look at my face.
They definitely look different, but this becomes like the point where we're starting to steer into what this episode is ultimately about. The Venus drug that they were taking to look beautiful has worn off, and Harry can't find where he put them. And then when he finally does, the two of the women, Ruth and Meg, take it, like they just snatch it out of his hand. Eve is reluctant to take it, but she finally does. And then they all look beautiful again.
There's so much about this scene that I think is worth talking about. And the first thing is the value that it puts on physical beauty. And I think even as a kid, I think even then I had a little bit of trouble with it. And part of it, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 70s after the hippie movement. Both my parents went to Berkeley. Like, I was raised in a very women's lib sort of environment. And so the idea of it's horrible that I'm ugly is like exactly the message you don't want to send. Even in the 60s, like, that's a really problematic message. It's also problematic that you have three incredibly beautiful women that you're trying to make look ugly, which they do succeed to some degree with the makeup. And we're also talking about, to some degree, this is an episode about drug addiction, I think, because it's not just that what we learn later, that the Venus drug changes appearance, but it also changes personality, because that's what Harry Mudd says later on. And so there's all these things that are kind of happening that we don't quite address. One other thing about it is that when we see the Venus drug, it sparkles. That's a really important little detail. And who is the person who most resists taking it is Eve.
You really bring up obviously an amazing point. This episode was controversial, not just because it objectifies women, but also because it was about drug addiction and about drugs. This episode aired in 1966. This is when the counterculture was really starting to become well known. It's when Ken Kesey's LSD experiments were going on, but yet even with the objectification of women and the sort of space hookers, for lack of a better term, angle of it, and even with the drug aspect of it, it still aired. It still got by the censors. And that was because it was disguised as science fiction.
Exactly.
And if it was a straight ahead drama, probably they would not have gotten away with it. But because it was a science fiction series, they got away with it.
Go on, Eve. Take it. It's not a cheat. It's a miracle.
And that's when Childress from Rigel 12 beams aboard the Enterprise, and Kirk is ready to do business, and he is making demands because he's already talked to Mudd.
What did you have in mind?
Mudd's women?
I love Shatner's reaction to this. He goes,
Is there anything else?
Childress is stern serious. He goes, if you beam down there, you won't find one blessed crystal. Kirk, like he clutches his jaw, and then he says, no deal. Like basically saying, who the hell do you think you're talking to? That's a great moment. That I love.
Again, I don't think this, I am going to be pretty critical of this episode. I just, there's just things that it just, the more I think about it, the more problems it has. And one of the big ones is we are talking about the death of hundreds of people, and the miners coming without having seen the women, just deciding we're willing to blackmail hundreds of people over their deaths without seeing the women. That doesn't ring true to me. And I mean, this is a terrible, terrible thing they're talking about doing. But when the women enter from that point, if we've established that they have these magnetic, magical effects on men, then I start to believe it. But that's not the way the scene is structured.
So now we beam down to Rigel 7, and it's a great set. And you got the wind machines going on. You got the dust blowing around. And they go into sort of the bar, if you will, where the three miners and the three women are canoodling up and dancing along. And Kirk, Spock, and Harry Mudd are there too. And the music in the background is called Space Radio. And it's composed by Fred Steiner. And like I said before, the score for this episode I like very, very much. But the thing is that here is an episode where Kirk is up against Harry Mudd. In the 3 years to come, we will have seen Kirk face off against much bigger, much more dangerous, much more ominous and scary foes. But he is helpless against Harry Mudd. Like, are you kidding? That this guy is the one that's holding the Enterprise hostage? It's just a crazy thing. But
I think that's a fantastic point. I hadn't quite thought about it. And again, that's another problem with the show. It's literally in the last episode we saw him invent Corbomite to manipulate this hugely powerful alien to not destroy his ship. And now his ship again is facing imminent destruction. And he's like, I guess there's nothing I can do. Like, where's Kirk? Like, why is he not trying to solve this problem? You just got to wait.
He's just got to wait. Right. And even Spock says, like, we don't have that much time. And Kirk like snaps at him like, you got a better idea. But, the three miners are fighting over the three women, and they start fighting with each other. And Eve is already disgusted by the whole thing. And she runs out of the bar and into the windstorm.
Well, and the thing that Eve says as she's leaving is, why don't you just run a raffle and the loser gets me? I do like this. And what I think is, and again, I go, oh, if only you were able to follow up some of this stuff, is because what is that showing? It's showing Eve's insecurity. It's showing, because Eve, part of her resistance to the Venus drug is that's not her, is that she's a person who wants love. She wants human connection. And now she thinks the only reason anyone likes her is because of this drug, including Captain Kirk. And now even with the drug, she feels rejected, and I think this is pointing to an interesting thing when you have something that is false being the thing that attracts people to you. You can't trust it. Because it's not really you. Like, you think about, are they coming to me because I'm a rock star, or are they coming to me because I'm me? I think it's Rita Hayworth who had the quote, it's something like, they went to bed with Rita, but they woke up with me. And I think that's what Eve's going through.
And Kirk goes after her, and then Childress goes after both of them. And, Kirk can't see 2 feet in front of him. And it's actually Childress who saves Eve and brings him back to his quarters. And Kirk is back on the Enterprise, and they're running out of time. And then we see, just shortly after Kirk snapped at Spock, Kirk snaps at Scotty.
If we only had those crystals.
But we don't. I didn't get any. I should have found a way. Satisfied, Mr. Scott.
And this is one episode after Kirk snapped at McCoy and apologized to him. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, this one I buy much less.
Yeah, I agree.
The other one, the tension was much, much higher.
So Eve is back in Childress's quarters, and she looks fine. She just looked like she was a little weathered because she was out in the storm. And I actually think that the chemistry between Karen Steele as Eve and Gene Donarski as Ben Childress is actually pretty good.
Totally agree. I agree.
Yeah. They did have a good banner, a good back and forth, and they're just talking, and she gives him the idea to put his pans out in the wind and let the dust blast it free. So he does that, and then he walks back into his quarters, and Eve looks like the drug has worn off, and the attraction he had to her is gone. And I can't get past this. He had a great conversation with her, and he was totally with her in the scene before. And now, because her looks have faded because the drug wore off, he's repulsed by her. And I get that that's what we're leaning into, but I just don't like this part of the episode. You know what I mean?
I totally do. And there's just several things that are wrong. The other thing that's wrong is the Enterprise is literally dying. Like, there's this really dramatic thing happening, and we're spending this really long scene with these two people talking. And I agree that they have some chemistry, but I also think even when she's beautiful, when she's cooking for him and stuff, he is horrible to her consistently. He is mean to her. And then when he comes back and she's playing double jack, not solitaire, Scott. It's not different rules. It's not quite the same rules as Fizbin. That's completely different. But
completely except on Tuesday.
But she's not nice to him. I mean, she is cold and aloof, and he is angry. And of course, the ship is dying right now. It's a very, very strange scene.
What the devil happened to your looks anyway?
I got tired of you. I slumped.
You heard what I said? You're homely.
It's starting to build toward like domestic violence. And then, Kirk and Mudd, save the day by walking in the door in the nick of time.
I didn't touch her.
Thank heaven you found her.
And then we sort of get to the point of the episode.
Well, and they reveal that this is because of the Venus drug, and they even hold out the Venus drug. And when Childress asks what it does, Mudd explains this drug, and he says,
what it does is give you more of whatever you have. With men, it makes them more muscular. Women, rounder. Men more aggressive, women more feminine, and...
He gave it to the women before you met them.
All right. This line had an effect on me as a kid. And I was thinking about it, and I think this is a line that we should spend a little bit of time on. Mm-hmm. The first thing is as a shy, nerdy kid who is 11 or 12 and going into puberty, who was really scared of talking to girls, and who loves superheroes and superhero stories where people would take, Our Man would take a pill and he would have superpowers for an hour or whatever it is. I saw this Venus drug pill as like superpowers. And in particular, it would be superpowers because I was interested in what it would do with a man. And I was like, oh, if I took this, then girls would like me, like I sort of was interested in that idea. And it seemed and the idea of a woman becoming more beautiful and more sexy, well, that sounded kind of cool too, to a pubescent 11-year-old shy, lonely kid, like that was a big deal. And then this is what I'm thinking about it now. And again, this is where it's like, judge it for 1966, but also think about it today. One of the big issues in the world today is gender roles. And we're really starting to explore because this says what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Women are supposed to be soft and round and feminine, and men are supposed to be big and strong and aggressive. And that is very traditional, inflexible versions of gender roles. and today, and particularly when we have trans rights, and I actually know several parents whose children feel that they identify as a different gender, and what that means. And so we're suddenly looking at, well, what does gender mean? What is it? Like, what is it that makes someone a man? And one thing that I really believe strongly is that, if you ask, like, what does it mean to be a man? My answer is nothing. It means nothing. Like, there are men who are tough and aggressive and physical, and there are men who are softer and gentler and quieter. And they're, I love to cook. I love cooking, and cooking was traditionally a woman's thing. In fact, we even see it in this show. Oh, home cooking from a woman. And it's like,
like wearing pink. I like wearing pink.
Yeah. It's like, again, it's 1966. These things hadn't happened yet.
Right.
But Star Trek is so ahead in so many areas. And this is one where it's so behind.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's the problem, is that there are so many episodes. And you look at like the 79, like proper, or 80 actually, if you include the cage, 80 episodes of the original series. The percentage of episodes that hold up 55 years later today it's a great ratio.
Oh yeah.
It's a very, very impressive ratio that so many of the episodes are good and so many episodes hold up and so many episodes are not dated. But here's an episode, for the reason that you just so eloquently explained, is an episode that has not aged well, and it's so dated. And there are aspects of this episode that I admire, and there are aspects of them that I kind of cringe while watching. And the scene between Childress and Eve in their quarters is definitely one of them. But at the same time, there comes a message, a positive message to this episode. And when Eve takes the drug, which is not even a drug, Kirk sort of slipped in a substitute, colored gelatin, and she still had the effect where she became physically beautiful again. And then comes the morale of the story, which is,
there's only one kind of woman.
Or man, for that matter.
You either believe in yourself or you don't.
And after all is said and done, after all the criticisms we've weighed against Mudd's women, to kind of end it on that note, in spite of the dated qualities and the dated aspects and the cringe-inducing moments of the episode, to sort of like stick the landing with that comment makes me go, okay, I'm good with you.
I think it's a great message. I think it doesn't make a lick of sense because it's like what, she believed herself into having a better hairdo. Like, she believed herself for her clothes not to be wrinkled. Like, it's and for the other women in particular, there are genuine physical differences. You actually can't believe yourself into that. And then we find out, that the other miners got married, and subspace radio marriage, which I love, is a thing. But they can have it annulled because it was obviously under false pretenses. And then Childress and Eve say, no, we're going to try this out. Like, and it's like, Childress has been nothing but a jerk to her, and she has not been particularly nice to him. And it's like, so now you're going to stay on this planet with this. I mean, like, it just is just not believable at all to me.
I agree. But for the first time in the episode, we see a hint of where the relationship where Kirk and Mudd is going to go in the following season when they walk out the door.
Don't you think you could possibly, by accident, arrange to leave me behind here on this planet? That would be punishment enough.
I can't do that, Harry. But I will appear as a character witness at your trial. If you think that'll help.
They'll throw away the key.
It's perfect. It's so funny, and it shows why these two characters have such good chemistry together.
Absolutely.
And Kirk has such a sense of humor, and he likes Harry Mudd in a weird way.
Yeah. I mean, like, even when they go back to the quarters, when Kirk says, "You're a liar, Mr. Walsh," I think we both understand each other. And Walsh walks out of his quarters, and Kirk looks at the door and smiles and just shakes his head like he's not taking any of this too seriously. But when they're back on the Enterprise for like the final moment before they warp out of orbit, Spock says something very un-Spockish on 2 points. He says, I'm happy the affair is over. A most annoying, emotional episode. Spock said he was happy, and he called something annoying. So again, we're not quite there yet. I think by the middle of the first season, that's a line that would not have been said quite that way by Spock, but it still works. You still have Kirk, Spock, and McCoy on the bridge, sort of like ending the episode with their little joke before they, sort of speed off into hyperspace.
Well, we have a little bickering between McCoy and Spock, which and we also find where Spock's heart is, which is somewhere around here. It's a funny little bit. And it's so funny. Like, people criticize show that, we'll say, oh, that's not right. They didn't do that right. And it's like, look, it takes a while to figure out all the stuff. I once tried to write a novel, which I never finished, and it was a sci-fi novel. And I realized, like, once I got, and it was like a colony on Mars, and I suddenly went, oh, I had to figure out everything, how the colony works, where they get their food from, where they get their power from, what does the hallways look like, what are they, I had to figure it all out. And I just went, oh my God, that's a lot. And Star Trek does an amazing job. Yes,
absolutely.
They're figuring stuff out as they go, but they really do an amazing job.
But you see, that's what's fascinating to me about watching these episodes in production order. Again, to put yourself in the context that nothing like Star Trek had ever been done before. So to see them finding their way with certain things like pacing and lighting, and certainly McCoy or Leonard Nimoy trying to find his way in Spock, I think it's fascinating to watch them figure it out as they go along for the first few episodes. But then at the same time, I have to say, for a show that had never been done before at all in the history of television, just as they are crossing over from black and white into color, there was so much that Star Trek got right out of the gate. And these early episodes, we talked about things, especially with regards to the mission statement, to the dynamic between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, Shatner's like spot on performance, the music. But there was one scene that was cut from the episode. Now, I don't know if it was filmed and cut or it was in the script and they never filmed it. But there was a scene where Harry Mudd is trying to convince Uhura to take the Venus drug.
Oh, really?
And he goes into this whole monologue where he was trying to convince her to take it. And Roger Carmel was very disappointed that the scene didn't make it into the final episode. Now, I couldn't tell if the episode was filmed or it was just in the script and just never filmed it, but that would have been an interesting scene to see Mudd try to convince Uhura to take the Venus drug. The other thing that's interesting is while they were filming this episode, there was a writer who was writing another screenplay. He was down on the stage taking pictures with the cast and not doing his job, to the annoyance of Bob Justman and some of the other producers. And that writer, who was supposed to be working very hard on his episode but wasn't, was a guy named Harlan Ellison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was supposed to be locked in his office on the Desilu lot, writing his screenplay that he was commissioned. The screenplay, of course, was Sitting on the Edge of Forever. But when they went into his office, and saw that he wasn't there, and they found him at the stage, they were pissed.
He must have walked in to look at Bud's women and just gone, "Come on, like let me show you how it's done."
Right. Let me show you how it's really done. But listen, talking about an episode like this with you, I see the flaws more clearly, and I see the strengths. And I see things that I never considered before. I mean, I think your whole point about she, her, him, he, his, and transgender, non-binary. I mean, that's all something that a line like the one you said just doesn't fit anymore. But it's still an episode that I still ultimately think is decent, not a required viewing. But from the standpoint of an early episode, it is still interesting to watch as they continue to find their way until they started to hit their stride in the middle of the first season.
I totally agree. I think there's things in here that are neat. And I think the cool thing about science fiction and about Star Trek is it gives us stuff to think about and to question. And even then, even though it doesn't quite hit it all right, it is trying to deal with these ideas of sexual attraction. It's trying to deal with ideas of drug addiction. It's trying to deal with some of that stuff. It doesn't do it that well, but I think this is one of the geniuses of Gene Roddenberry's ideas, is that he knew that getting us on the Star Trek Enterprise would allow us not to tell just one kind of story, but to tell all different kinds of stories. And this is a good example of a very different kind of story.
Absolutely it is. And I always felt like, Star Trek really was at its best when it sort of looked at contemporary issues and portrayed them in such a subtle way that you didn't feel like you were being beaten over the head.
Right.
Now you have an episode like in the third season, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. While an effective episode, there's nothing subtle about it. It's as subtle as a sledgehammer. And in this episode, Mudd's Women, the drug angle at a time when drugs were obviously making the rounds in society. But then you have an episode like This Side of Paradise, which deals with the hippie movement in a very, very clever, subtle, very sci-fi way.
Yeah.
And that's one episode I'm really looking forward to talking about.
Scott, I had a little bit of trepidation about Mudd's Women, but the fact is that was a fantastic conversation. And if you want to tune in for more of these conversations, you just need to subscribe to the show on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, Audible, a whole bunch of other places. Please leave your reviews. It's really important for the show to get noticed. And if you want to interact with us, you can do it on our Facebook page. Search for Enterprise Incidents on Instagram, but it's only Enter Incidents on Twitter. Scott, how would people find you?
Well, please let us know what you think and hit me up on Twitter. My handle here is @MovieMance, all one word. Also on Instagram @MovieMance. But please hit us up on Twitter because we want to know what you think of Enterprise Incidents. We will respond. We want to hear your feedback on what you think, not just of the show, but what you think we should do to make Enterprise Incidents even better than it already is. We are very, very excited to be doing Enterprise Incidents. And personally speaking, this is a very big deal for me, not just because I have loved Star Trek all my life, but because this is the very first podcast that I have co-hosted on a regular basis. And I got to tell you, I could not ask for a better first officer than Steve Morris. Steve, where can people find you?
They can find me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And I'm proud to be your number one. It was so good having you as a guest officer on the Cinephiles so many times, including 2001 and Blade Runner. Blade Runner is one of people's favorite episodes of all times. Even though we recorded it 3 years ago, we still get people commenting on that episode. So check out the Cinephiles. I have a feeling, while we had a good conversation on Mudd's Woman, that we might even have a better conversation coming up next.
One good thing about Enterprise Incidents, and, we're really early into the show, but I can already tell that with each and every conversation we have, Steve, on these 80 episodes of the original series, of course, including The Cage, that episodes that I maybe sort of liked, I like a whole lot more, and episodes that I really love, I love even more. And with that, wait till you hear our conversation for the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, which is an episode that is extremely crucial to the development of the series, and extremely crucial to the relationship between James T. Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Leonard McCoy. And this is an episode that has a lot going for it. There's a lot to discuss. We go deep, and this is an episode that is very controversial because of an incident, shall we say, that happens between Captain Kirk and Yeoman Rand. The episode, of course, we're talking about here is The Enemy Within. So make sure you come back and listen to it twice for the dark Kirk and for the good Kirk. Next on Enterprise Incidents. Until then, keep going boldly.